I'm Freda Kelly. I was Freda Bulmer, and I was born out on Highway 121 in what was the Brandon farm, as my father was doing some work on the farm and coming into Fenelon Falls as a blacksmith with Tom Polson. Later, we moved into town and lived up on the house on Queen Street. And then we moved over to where the Bell Telephone is now, and then on up to Bond Street East. Mark Fell and Angus Campbell from Burnt River put a second story on that house. Then they were working on the house. We moved down to Mark Fell's house on the corner because Mark was working on the house. And we came on the New Year's Day of 1928. We moved from there by horse and sleigh back up to our new home with the second story. I spent a great deal of time down at the blacksmith shop. In fact, when I get home from school, I changed my clothes when I got home after we got the wood in and the water carried up from down the street where there was a spring. And then I would go to the blacksmith shop, and my dad would let me do some work and maybe do yokes for the horses on the machine, the lathe. And then also I would often get up in the mornings with Dad when he would have to put the steel tires off the wagon wheels. They would have become loose, and they would bring it in, and they would have to be in the machine he had. We would have to heat the tires and make them smaller so that they would fit the wheels after. And often it would be early in the morning, and you'd build a fire out in the blacksmith shop yard and heat these tires. Dad would clamp them a little bit, put them in water, and immediately put them on the wheels that were tied down on the big plates that they had of steel. And often on weekends, when we would be home from school, I would take Dad's lunch down in a pail, and with hot tea or with tea made, and he could put it on a stove that was in the blacksmith shop and heat it more, and we'd have our lunch in the shop. Of course, the hydro men used to be in too a good deal, and during the week they'd sit on the bench, and Dad had, it wasn't electricity, but it was something that wouldn't harm them, would be hooked up to his forge, and he would touch a button, and with that the men would just jump up because there was a current went through underneath them. So there was always something like that he was doing. He also had, at Christmas time, quite often he'd go down to some of the places in the stores and show them what had just come from Korea. And he would take and they had a hole in the bottom with a lot of sawdust in it, and he said he'd tell them that this came from Korea. And he said, and it's a thumb that has belonged to somebody, and he'd take a little bit of the sawdust off, and you could see the thumb there, and he said, just touch it. And they would touch it, and it would flip up. So he scared many, many people. When my dad was about 16, he and my Uncle Bob, who was younger, were at what is now the log chateau, and they lived in the log house there and looked after the cattle that would be in the barn across the railway track. And often during the Depression years, the men whom we called hobos would jump the train in Fenelon Falls or Lindsay or someplace, and they would quite often drop off because it was the train seemed to slow at that area. They would jump off, and they'd be at the door of the log house that was there to try and get some food. And my dad and Uncle Bob would give them bread, and then they told them that they could sleep in the barn. And they would be out in the barn for the night and maybe jump the train the next morning when the train would be going back up to Halliburton Way. And sometimes when they were coming back, they would also drop in at where my dad and Uncle Bob were staying and looking after the cattle that were in the barn there. I went to school on the Fenelon Falls Public School, the one on the top of the hill, the first school, and then later went to normal school. At 18, I went to teach at the school down near Bobcaygeon, and then out to the Fenelon Township. In 1939, I went to teach in first of all, in the number 4 Verulam School, which was near Bobcaygeon, and I boarded with the Charlie and Iva Martins, and 2 of the children went to school from the house. Of course, we had to take your noon lunch with you, and I had 4 Patterson boys, and they would come to school from the farm just next to the school. And the first day that I was there to teach, they came to school in their bare feet, and they came in with a snake, a garter snake. As they came in, I said, "Oh, what have you got there?" And they said, and held it up, and they said, "A snake." And I said, "Oh, well, isn't that a lovely garter snake? Where did you get it?" They said, "Over in that field." Well, I said, "I'm not afraid of snakes. I think they're wonderful. They eat a lot of insects and bugs." And I said, "You just take that snake out and put it back in the field where you got it." And that was the end of the chasing teachers out of the school with a snake. So from then on, I had no problems with those 4 boys. My second school was out at number 8 Fenelon on the road to Rosedale. And the first year I was there, we had our Christmas concert, and the parents and friends from the community were invited. And we also had a square dance after the program, and the people really enjoyed that because some of the local people brought their musical instruments, and we had the piano there. And lo and behold, during the Christmas holidays, a couple of the Swanton boys were down by the school, and the windows seemed to be all clouded. And they had a key because they used to go in to do some work in the school. And they went in, and part of the ceiling had come down, and the lime and shavings were all over, and there were 3 of the desks, the children's desks, that were broken with it was just one corner came down. So it was just a good job after the square dance and after the children all being in school, that it was lucky that it collapsed during the holiday. Often my dad and the family would be invited out to farms because we had an ice cream freezer. And we would take the ice, and usually the salt, and drive out to these farms, and Dad would maybe put the shoe on the horse that lost its shoe, and then it was the ice cream party. So Mother would always make up the ice cream, with the eggs, and if we had maple syrup or whatever we had, and the farmers would have the cream there, and she'd do the mixing up, and we put it into the ice cream freezer with the salt and the ice, bits of ice to keep it cold, and then we'd turn the handle, and everybody'd have a chance to keep cranking up the handle till you couldn't make it go anymore, and you know the ice cream was done. And then it was party time. And one place that we went to was the Stiles, just outside of town. And Dad would put the shoe on the horse, and then we'd have the ice cream freezer that we took out, and they'd bring on the milk and the cream, and the mother would make it up, and we'd start turning the handle, taking turns. And this one time we went out, and the youngest daughter of the Stiles, it was she was to try her entrance exams the next day to go on to high school the next year. And she overate on ice cream and didn't feel very well in the morning exam day, but she went to school anyway, and lo and behold, she had her paper out to write, and it got really messed up because she was ill. So she missed her year at school and repeated and passed the next year. And in 19 and 62, Milburn Kelly and I were married, and we had one son, Robert, who now has 2 children. So I'm a proud grandma. I was a proud grandma at 89. And I'm still living in the Kelly home, which is on 21 Francis Street East in Fenelon Falls. And I was even out to visit at the seniors' home this morning with my friend, Hazel Graham, and to see some of the people over there who have been friends for many years. I just thank you, and I thank my Lord and Savior that I have been spared these years to enjoy life. And that's it.